Hey, everybody, it's Friday, the 8th of January. I always have to look at the calendar because, when you work from home, you kind of lose track of the days. You are at Litvak Leadership Live, and I am here today with my good friend. And I say good friend because we've run in the same circles, haven't spent a lot of time together, but he's a legend in the homeschooling community. Let me introduce you to the founder of the Institute for Excellence in Writing, Andrew Pudewa. Hello, Andrew. How are you?
Hi, doing well, Sean. Good to be with you.
I'm very excited to have you here. So for anyone who doesn't know who Andrew is, Andrew has really revolutionized, and here we'll say hi to my cousin Sari, one of our biggest fans. So Andrew has really revolutionized reading, writing, and speaking, and the homeschool community really engaged with him and has been the benefactors, although there are the public school community also. But Andrew, why don't you tell us when you founded your organization and what the genesis of it was?
Yeah, sure. It goes back to when I was really very young, about half my age. And I was working for a small school in Montana. And this school decided to send all of their faculty up to Canada to take an 11-day teacher training course called the Blended Sound Site Program of Learning. And it wasn't a big school, a small private school. So we all went up there, a dozen of us or so, and I took this course called Blended Structure and Style in Composition.
Okay.
And so I learned this from this team of Canadian teachers, came back to my home in Montana, taught at that school using this writing program, and got fantastic results. It surprised me, surprised the kids, surprised everybody. And so the next summer, I decided to go back to Canada and do the same course again because I knew I could learn more. Came back,
Right.
I actually left that school, started teaching individual kids and tutoring after school stuff. Went a third year, and I just kept going back to Canada to hang out with these people and learn more.
Same course over and over?
Same course. Well, after the third time, they said, well, if you're going to keep coming up here, we'll make you a part of the staff. So, you don't have to pay, but we'll put you to work. And so it was great. It was a great time. And I ended up founding the Institute for Excellence in Writing in 1995. And so that was a kind of a transition period from 95 to 99. I was still teaching music, Suzuki method, violin, kinder music, still teaching music full time, doing writing seminars on the side, made a couple videos. And by 2000, I was making more money with teaching writing stuff than I was teaching music. So I thought, okay, this is full time. And from there, it's just been tremendous. We, started out with just me in a garage, and now we have 50 some full-time equivalent employees. We have 3 different facilities here in the Tulsa, Oklahoma area.
Wow.
And we're just very excited to see how things are continuing to grow, even faster, especially this past year.
So when you first started out, and I guess let's see, if you started in 95, I would have met you, well, my son was born in 95, so obviously not that early, but it was when he was entering, I think he would have been in middle school as we were homeschooling him. We brought him to one of your student trainings in Fort Wayne, Indiana. So you were on the road, you were producing videos. How did you get your name out there and promote yourself initially?
Well, thankfully, if you have a good product or service, most of the best promotion that you can do or get is other people and word of mouth. So I spoke at my first homeschool convention in 1997. By the year 2002, I had usually half a dozen or more conventions lined up. So I was doing a lot of those, as well as starting to schedule live events in different places. Had a relationship with a large homeschool organization, very strategic. They actually produced a set of videotapes first, and then they became DVDs. Sold those for almost 20 years before or 15 years before redoing that. And so I would say, that just my philosophy has always been basically, this is God's business. It's my job to just be sure that I do my best and don't mess things up. But, the Lord will bless or not, and I can't take entirely too much credit or blame either way. I kind of had reached a point personally in my life where I was ready to kind of, surrender and say, okay, I'm not going to try to run my own life. I'm going to try to, let the Lord lead. So that's kind of the origin of the company. And we've, of course, added to the product line over the couple decades. We've got some very strong strategic alliances with different homeschool as well as charter and public school groups. So it's amazing.
So where do you see? I'll tell you that reading, writing, and speaking. When you talk to people and you ask them to get up in front of people and speak, people just freeze. I know lots of people who don't, but I know even more people who do. And, I think it's a matter of lack of confidence, but in a lot of sense, a lack of one's ability to speak clearly, to have a large vocabulary. How did you leverage that into creating leaders?
That's so interesting, because you made me realize there are two aspects of being successful in public speaking. One is comfortability, and the other one is quality of content. And you really do need both, don't you? I can think of times when I've been to a convention and, someone's reading a paper and this is good stuff, but it's just so tedious and it goes on and you just think, okay, I'm done. Just send me the paper. I'll read it. So there you have quality of content, but, not connecting with the audience at all. What's funny is sometimes people who do that, if they go off their script, they're really good. And they say things that are immediately engaging, but then they're like, oh no, I got to get back to, my paper. On the other hand, I've seen some speakers who are very, very comfortable on stage, but they really don't have substance that has grabbed me at all for any length of time. And you wonder, are they as ignorant about how useless the information is as I am aware? I don't know. But when we're working with kids, these two things come through. The first, the quality of content, that's all in that lineup: listen, speak, read, write, think. You develop through the knowledge of grammar, through the application of reasoning and logic, through the practice of the organization as well as invention and elocution of rhetoric. You work with content. And what's interesting is, generally, the more that someone knows, the more content they have to work with. This is why there's kind of an anti-knowledge current in modern education. Why should kids learn names and dates and people and places? You don't need to know that, because you can just ask your phone, right? And so why clutter students' lives with useless information? But the newest research actually comes and says, no, the more general knowledge that a child has, the higher their reading comprehension is going to be, even if they struggle with reading impediments, visual or dyslexic tendencies. So a dyslexic student who knows a lot about baseball will have higher comprehension on something written about baseball than a non-dyslexic student who never played baseball. So what we're starting to see is the more you know, the better you can understand everything: what you read, what you hear, the world around you. And so that's where, of course, I think homeschooling and independent schooling, it's been very strong because of this great emphasis on Let's know our heritage. Let's know our history. Let's know what happened before. Let's have mastery of people and facts and dates so we can organize all this, so we can think faster. Daniel Willingham, who wrote a very, very important book called Why Don't Students Like School? He said, your brain will always be faster than Google.
Always.
You will never catch up with searching any kind of database as what you can access if you have it inside your mind. So, that's part of it. The second part of getting kids successful in front of groups is aptitude, right? If you can create an aptitude for doing that from a young age, it's a lot easier than trying to do it at an older age.
So let me ask you this, with so many parents now finding themselves thrust into homeschooling or schooling support, what do you have to say to those parents who, are staring their kid in the eye going, well, I don't feel like I was smart enough to do this, or I didn't do well at school? What do you have to say to those parents that now have this, they always had the responsibility to ensure their children were educated, but now they've got the hands-on responsibility? What do you have to say to them?
Well, it's interesting. Some of the most important things that can happen in the education of children throughout almost all of history have been entirely done in the home. The most important part of education has always happened in the home.
Give us some examples.
Well, okay, reading. Historically, literate families taught their children to read.
That makes sense.
You would actually, in a certain period of time, you wouldn't send a child to school until they could read, because that would just be a waste of time.
Right.
So, you teach them to read, and then they can go to school and, read literature in Latin and Greek and do all sorts of stuff that we never get around to. So, that would be one example. Think about how your young children, 3, 4, 5, and unlike you, Sean, I'm blessed with many grandchildren. And so I get a chance to observe them now without the underlying stress of being a parent who has to deal with everything. So it's really, it's the best part of being alive in your 60s, as far as I can tell, is grandchildren. But what I've noticed is that it's really in the home where they get this tremendous opportunity to practice the repetition that they need. So I have an 8-year-old grandson who's constantly singing multiplication songs. I have a 5-year-old grandson, who's walking around the house, getting you to read him anything that he can see. I have a 3.5-year-old grandson who sings alphabet songs all day long.
Wow.
Now, they didn't go to school, nor are they technically homeschooled. What's happening? They're hanging out with mostly mom and sometimes dad.
Teaching.
Yeah. And, so what are they learning? They're learning to listen. They're learning to speak. They're learning to read in a very natural way. Some of them faster than others. Some kids pick it up and just suck it out of the air at 5 years old. Other kids don't read till they're 8, 9, even 10 or older. I've had both. They learn, to have a organizational method in the home that, hopefully is more organized than less, but certainly better than chaos. That gives them an external way. And then, of course, they all learn to spell ice cream first, because dad always says to mom, do we have any ICECREAM? So, when you think about the home environment, it's really optimal for learning most of what children need to learn. And then what you can't do, you just supplement with books. And reading out loud to children is the single most important thing that you can do in any given day, if what you want is better writers and speakers of English 10 years from now.
Well, and it's interesting, because I remember when we were homeschooling our children, in the early years, and people said, well, what are you going to do when they get to high school? And my response is, yeah, that's down the road. They're like, well, what about, and we were starting in I think second grade with our son, in kindergarten with our daughter. And they're like, well, what are you going to do when you get to biology? And my answer was, I don't know. I got time to figure that out. My wife and I figured that out. So, I think a lot of parents out there, have found themselves thrust into this situation, and they're looking at going, okay, what do I do? How can I help my kids? If I know one family that's hired a tutor, okay, but let's say you don't have the financial wherewithal to hire a tutor. How do you see that parents can, grab the bull by the horns? What resources are there for them to be able to help their children with reading, writing, speaking, and growing up into the leaders that they want them to be?
Yeah, well, we kind of maybe look at some age brackets here, because you might consider it, differently depending on the age of the children that you have at home.
Sure.
If your children are young, and I would throw anyone up through about 8 years old, probably in that general category, your absolute most important thing to do every day is to read out loud to those children. That will build the vocabulary, the database of English grammar and a syntax. It will furnish the mind with poetic use of language, as well as great ideas, whether it's fiction, the good and great books, or whether it is poetry, or whether it is, even a book about something scientific or natural science kind of book. And so with young children, you're going to start probably with picture books and then gradually move into chapter books. Fortunately, libraries are still in operation, and more is available on the internet than ever before in history in terms of literature. So with young children, if you just could read out loud, 20, 30 minutes 2 or 3 times a day, you'd actually be doing the most important thing you could possibly do to help them develop their language and their comprehension and their general knowledge and their interest and their love of learning. Now, on top of that, you can say, okay, so what do schools generally do? Well, they try to teach a little bit of spelling around first, second, third grade. They try to teach a little bit of, they should try to teach a little bit of spelling. So,
Right.
okay, what can you find to do that? Yeah, and there's curricula you can buy. There's also a tremendous amount of free stuff online.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you can go get second grade spelling worksheets. There's, umpteen options are all free. Math, right? And so, the problem with math is people want to say, well, I have an 8-year-old, so he needs third grade math. Well, maybe not. What he needs is math he can do plus a little bit harder, just a little bit. So math is a great thing to teach at home, because you can go according to the speed at which the child acquires the skill, the speed of mastery. And you don't have to go by this mechanical, we do 9 months, we're in third grade, then we forget everything for 3 months. Now we do 9 months and we're in fourth grade, and then we forget everything. And then by fifth grade, we still don't remember the basic multiplication tables, and things start to break down. So mastery learning, individualized instruction for math, again, tremendous online, relatively free resources. And then you'd say, okay, children that age, what's their main thing in life is to play. So you want to give them a lot of imaginative playtime. Very important for language development, and I would argue for cognitive development, is to minimize screen-based entertainment.
Yeah.
And if possible, you
Probably
find a math
too.
Say again?
Probably important for adults too.
Well, yeah, it's either, it's true, and it may be too late, but for kids that age, up through about 8 years old, honestly, the less screen time they have, the more thinking and imagination they will be forced to do. In fact, this is a funny little known thing that I remember finding when I was doing a talk on television many, many years ago. So this is a very, very old quote, but it said, it requires more neural activity to stare at a blank wall than it does to watch a sitcom on TV.
Wow.
When you think about it, The
Amazing.
sitcom is doing all your thinking for you. If you're staring at a blank wall, you'd have to conjure up something in your memory or imagination, or you'd simply go insane. Which is probably why historically putting children in a corner wasn't a terribly bad thing, because then they had to figure out, why am I in this corner?
Think about why you're there.
What did I do? Anyway, so that idea then of minimizing screen time, of course, children are highly sensitive to music in that early period. And so you want to be sure you have, not just nice music, but good, great music, Bach and Handel and Mozart and Beethoven and Vivaldi. The music that truly endures, because it uplifts the spirit as well as the mind. And,
and that's easy to find now, because you just pull out Spotify or iTunes or whatever and say, play classical music. Done.
Yeah. You can even, you got like classical music. Sorry, go ahead.
I said, you don't even need to know whose music to ask for. You can just say, play classical music.
Yes. So, like, again, we have opportunity beyond what has ever existed ever before. We just have to make use of it in the proper way. But playing good and beautiful music. And then if parents have the means to starting music lessons on, say, a piano or a violin or a guitar or something around 6, 7, 8 years old, that's, in my view, a way more important part of a child's education than, say, having a science textbook at 7 or 8 years old. So, you want to look at those things that are going to enrich, as I said, the spirit and the mind and the body. But don't just go to recreate school at home. Instead, really look at the whole child. Try to follow their interests and promptings when you choose what to read out loud with them. Work for mastery in those cumulative skills like spelling and math, and then fill your world with good and beautiful music and art and things like that. That's right there. That's a great early childhood education.
So where do you go for inspiration?
Well, I have a number of friends who I meet during a normal year 4, 5, 6, 7 times at different cities and conventions. We're kind of like we're on a panel, classical education panel together. So we talk about, classical education, leadership education, the value of the great books, the value of things like the liberal arts, grammar, logic, Latin, rhetoric. This year, the whole conversation is moving and shifting over, talking about the scientific or mathematical arts a little bit more.
Sure.
So, but I haven't seen them, but we've done online events together and we talk. I have a personal reading coach, and he's way smarter than I will ever be, and he's read way more than I will ever have read. So when I'm short on knowing what to do next, I ask it. It's kind of, a mentor. I enrolled him as my personal reading coach. And I think whatever level we are, we can find some people to be our mentors, either by example or by direct consultation. And so I've tried to keep doing, that, and just keep learning more about what I'm most interested in learning about.
So as students are moving forward in this time, and parents are moving forward, and we had spoken briefly about the potential change in government in the next 14, 13 days, depending upon which side of the aisle people are sitting on. Where do you see homeschooling going, and parents being able to speak into their children's education?
Well, I think it's becoming much more important for those people who value the Western tradition, who value American heritage, our history and heritage, who value a basic Judeo-Christian moral system, people who value the types of character qualities that are taught in a home, in a good, solid home, are going to have to be more active in being aware of what their children are doing, particularly in relation to a government financed or government run school. There are some podcasts out there that are rather shocking in the expose of the extraordinary bias that seems to be dominant, if not almost universal, in many public school environments. One that I would recommend, if can I recommend a podcast?
You can recommend, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, he's a little extreme, but Duke Pesta, Pesta, he has the Dr. Duke show, and he brings in some of these extreme things that the mainstream media is not reporting on that are happening in schools. I think you could boil it down into one statement. I had an acquaintance who was the principal of a public school middle school in California, who wrote a book called Why the Principal Homeschools.
Wow.
Right? So he said, any parent who read this book would pull their kids out of my school. So I may lose my job. But here's the bottom line. Any parent who knows what's going on in this school would pull their kids out. And
Any
so,
parent.
I think one of the side effects, one of the side effects we've heard is parents who, for the first time, looking over their kid's shoulder at the computer screen, are hearing the teacher speak to the students, and in many cases are quite surprised about, the content that's going on there. So, parents need to be more involved. If you look at the whole idea of conveyor belt education versus leadership education, that's one of my big talks. Conveyor belt education isn't new. It's been around since the Egyptians and the Spartans, but we've got really good at, get on, everybody do the same thing in the same way, according to the same schedule to get the same result. And so that's kind of what we've got going. And when you want to get off that conveyor belt, the world outside will make that seem too dangerous. Oh no, if you don't stay in school, you will fail in the real world. So you have to stay in schools, and we'll define what that means for you increasingly. And that's what I think, the future holds, is a increasingly narrow definition of what is an acceptable education for, a person living in this country. So we need to fight that by broadening out and saying, no, all children are different. They learn differently. Parents are the best teachers. If they can't teach directly, they should have control over the education of children, because standardized education does not work to create a thriving, vibrant, multicultural society.
Wow.
That is my sermon.
I like it. That works well, but does standardized anything work? I mean, standardized is good for a foundation, but you need to take what is standardized, in my opinion, whether it's in business, whether it is in associations, whether it's in homes, and then turn it into what works for those individuals, how you engage people.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of like our method of teaching writing. We have structure and style. We have models and checklists. Some people complain, well, when you make kids follow these models and you make them do everything on this checklist, doesn't that stifle their creativity? Can't they express themselves without all of those rules and things you have to do? My experience is no, by doing the exercises by following the rules, by practicing the models and the checklist, what happens is you increase your repertoire of things you can do. And then you reach a point of critical mass of elements, of things that you know. And then you hit this amazing combination and permutation of previously known things or abilities. And that's where creativity exists. Mozart did not become the great composer without a whole childhood building up this phenomenal database of music in his brain, right?
Absolutely.
Nobody becomes a creative artist until they've mastered the basics. Even Picasso, and I'm not a big Picasso fan, but you think about the price tag, Picasso could draw with almost photographic precision. And then on that foundation, he was able to change things and mutate them and distort them in ways that were appealing. Not everyone can just go throw stuff on a canvas and be Picasso. So what we look at in then just, I think, overall, cultivating leadership skills in kids is you want to give them the broadest experience, the greatest depth of information, the true liberal mind, which is trained by grammar and logic, and then becomes able to debate responsibly using appropriate rhetoric, which is the point where you and I interfaced with the NCFC debate,
Right.
And then, we can't neglect the character elements as well, because it doesn't do any good to have a extremely skilled, competent, persuasive, unprincipled person. That's a danger to society. So,
well, and let me interrupt you a second, because I remember when we first started homeschooling, and people said to us, well, I'll call her out. My mother said to us, when I explained to her why we wanted to homeschool, she said, so you don't want your children to have a broad mind? I said, no. I said, I want them to be narrow-minded initially, and we will decide what is there foundationally. And then once they get older, they have the opportunity to make their own decisions. But now you were just saying, and I'd like you to clarify it, because I have a feeling you agree with me, but what you just said almost sounds like you didn't, that there should be a broad education, but I think you mean within certain parameters.
Well, sure. You as a parent are responsible for transmitting your heritage, your faith, if you believe it. I mean, there are a lot of people who have a faith and they don't believe it, so they don't transmit it, so their kids grow up with no faith. It would be better to grow up believing something and discovering you were wrong than to grow up not believing anything. However, it is the parent's responsibility, and always has been throughout all history. The school traditionally has been very limited and controlled by parents. When you think about a school board, in the small town, it was the parents of the kids in the school. Yes. In a large city, it becomes a political situation. But originally, the school and the teachers were accountable to the parents to teach what the parents deemed and what the state, through its working in the best interest of the family, deemed were the appropriate content and skills. And that kind of existed until schools became their own authority. There's no higher authority really than the State Department of Education, and even their authority over the district is somewhat curricularly limited. So what's happened, and what I would respond to your mother now, and this is not necessarily the way it was 20 years ago, but the way I would respond to your mother now would be to say, yes, I want my children to have a broad education and a narrow public school that teaches a narrow worldview, a narrow party line, a politically correct wokeness as the required belief system, and everyone's reading the same books, which narrows everyone into the same very narrow channel of thinking. No, I want a broad education, which is why I would choose to homeschool. So it's interesting. The whole thing is almost turned upside down in 20, 25 years.
Yeah, it's very, very, very interesting. Well, I told you we'd go 30 minutes, and we've gone 35 already. It moves very quickly. So as we're winding down now, and people watch this on replay, what words of encouragement do you have for the viewers? What do you want to send them off into their weekend, or when they come and watch this in the coming weeks? How can you encourage them in this day and age?
Well, it's an exciting time to be a parent because some of the challenges that you face, particularly with social media and gaming and online everything, are some of the worst that I know of in history. It's a very, very, very hard time to be a parent. And yet you are called to that. You've accepted that. Every parent teaches their children at home. It's just some choose to do more of that than others. So whether or not you want to take on the full responsibility, look at those ways in which you can have an increasingly positive effect, cultivating the good and the true and the beautiful in the minds and the hearts of your children. Any little thing you do, anytime you play a beautiful piece of music for 10 minutes, that is an investment in their future. And when you think about it that way, every minute counts. A lot of us are finding ourselves in different circumstances this year. And I, for example, have had a lot more time. I've been able to reprioritize. And so perhaps that's something that you can do, is reprioritize and say, yes, I may put my kid in a school. I don't know. The school may or may not continue to serve our needs, but I